Well, for a second day and a final day, a truck convoy from Western Canada took to the streets in front of the Parliament buildings again today. It was a much smaller turnout than yesterday as the United We Roll protest came to an end. The convoy of mostly energy industry workers from Alberta drove to Ottawa to demonstrate their opposition to carbon taxes, proposed new environmental assessment legislation, and some immigration policies as well, and to express their support for pipelines. They've also faced some counter-protests, though, on Parliament Hill. People who accuse the convoy of being a front for racist groups, but organizers say their primary goal is to raise opposition to the Trudeau government's energy policies. Now, while all that's been taking place, the leader of Canada's largest business group is warning that Canada has come to an economic and social tipping point because of stalled or rejected energy infrastructure projects. Perrin Beatty is the president and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and he's with me now. Mr. Beatty, good to see you again.
Great to be here.
Your comments, your warnings today, I suppose, timely in the context of some of the sentiment we're now seeing in different parts of the country, and in particular, different parts of the country and the way they feel about other parts of the country. And we're seeing more of that these days. Tell me how you think we got here. Why do you say, and that's a fairly dire warning, that we're at this tipping point in the fabric, economic and social fabric of the country?
Peter, I think the great concern here is that people, particularly in Western Canada, particularly in the energy sector, feel as if they just aren't being given any priority at all. And there's a very deep concern that they're being left to fall behind, and that if this had been happening in any other part of the country, Ottawa would have been all over it and would have been anxious to make sure that problems were addressed. In this instance, one of our most important sectors, our resources sector that employs so many Canadians right across the country, is in a serious slump. In the case of oil and gas, we have a regulatory system that is entirely broken at the present point, and where it doesn't appear as if there's a formula to get us out of this. So Ottawa has to address this with some urgency. It is not simply an economic issue. It's not simply a regional issue. It goes to the very fabric of Canada itself.
You're a former politician, you're a former cabinet minister, former head of the CBC, which is where we crossed paths before, but and in other places. But how is it different than what we've seen before? So there's areas of disagreement over policy and over direction. How is that different than the kinds of protests and concerns we may have seen in the past?
I think more than anything else, the sense of injustice that people are feeling. There's a sense of discrimination that Western Canadians in particular are feeling. They feel that the government, far from being helpful in resolving their problems, has made the issues worse. And as a consequence then, they feel that there's an unfairness here that goes well beyond the economic issues themselves. But when you have a situation where people are losing their homes, where their businesses are having to close, where they're not sure they'll have jobs or what sort of future there'll be for their kids, people are deeply worried. And they want to see action on the part of their national government. And what's important for us is to realize that this is not simply a regional issue. It's a national issue that affects the very fabric of Canada and the well-being of Canadians in every part of the country.
The government will say, and has said, look, we bought a pipeline. We believe we can have energy development and environmental protections, consultations with Indigenous groups. We can have it all, but we have to get the right framework in place. We're not there yet, and those consultations need to continue. Some people would say, look, this debate in the country was bound to happen at some point, and essentially over the future of fossil fuels, climate change, the environment, consultations, and we're having it at this moment in time. It's unavoidable.
Well, let's start with buying the pipeline. The fact that the government bought the pipeline and that you and I own it today is proof that the system is broken. Kinder Morgan was never looking for a penny from the federal government. They were looking for a yes. They played by all of the rules, they went through all of the processes, they had all of the approvals, yet it still couldn't get built. And they had reached the point where they felt that it was better to simply write off the investment and leave the country and invest elsewhere than it was to try to continue to build the pipeline extension. So the federal government, as a last resort, stepped in as the only way of keeping the project alive. We have a regulatory system that is badly broken.
And this government says it's trying to fix it. It says, look, it's been broken for years. That's why we can't get anything done. We're going to make it right, and it's going to take time.
Well, and that's precisely the concern. We've seen disinvestment from our energy sector in particular, and we've seen in the mining sector with the current regulations that's been very hard for people who want to build projects as well. We need legislation that modernizes the status quo, that doesn't simply continue the situation that we have today, but one where at the end of the day, you respect the rights of communities, where you ensure that the environment is protected, but where decisions can get made and implemented. And the difficulty that we have with what's proposed in Bill C-69 is it won't achieve those goals. What we'll have with Bill C-69, if it isn't amended, and we want very much to see it amended and improved, if it's not, we'll be simply driving investment from Canada and losing more jobs from this country.
How do you back away, I guess, from the tipping point? And how do you repair the fabric? If the premise is that at some point the country needs to engage in a debate over the future of fossil fuel production, and it's a polarized debate, as
yes.
you see that environmentalists are never going to, most of them are never going to say, this is a great idea, keep producing more fossil fuels for export and sales and boost the Canadian economy and the Western economy. They're more interested in saying, look, we're concerned about the environment, we're concerned about climate change, and we don't buy the argument that you can have both energy development and a reasonable plan to eliminate climate change. How do you respond to that?
Every poll, including polls in British Columbia, show that Canadians believe that it is possible to get our resources to market in a responsible way, that we can have both. And they're anxious to see us move ahead on this. We have to shift the debate from whether to how. How do we ensure that we have the highest possible environmental standards? How do we ensure that the rights of Aboriginal, of Indigenous Canadians are fully respected? How do we ensure that the rights of communities are respected? And how do we ensure that decisions can be made where we can move ahead? All of that starts with a resources policy, and we don't have one today. If I were to ask you today, what is the commitment of the federal government? What at root does Ottawa believe in terms of our resources? Because we have this existential angst that would exist only in Canada about, we have all of these resources, aren't we unfortunate, should we leave them in the ground? No other country anywhere in the world would be going through that sort of a debate. We need to start with a resources policy. And it needn't be fancy. You can fit it on the front of a 3x5 index card, and it would say simply, we are committed to getting Canadian resources to global markets in a responsible way. Everything flows from that. Without that, what you have is gridlock.
If this doesn't get fixed quickly, where do you think we're headed?
Well, I think I can say, as somebody who served in Parliament for 21 years, that I haven't seen such divisions in Canada since the time of the NEP. And I don't say that lightly. There is a very real sense of injustice that people are feeling. And this goes well beyond any economic issue. It goes to the very heart of who we are as Canadians and our ability to have Canadian unity. You'll recall the slogan of the old Reform Party was, "The West wants in." The West today is feeling as if the doors are still shut against them. And it's important for us, particularly for those of us who lead national institutions, to be saying this is an issue in which every single Canadian family has a stake. We need to get Canadian resources to market. We need to ensure that we get the maximum benefit from that, and that we can contribute to rising living standards around the world as a result.
All right, Perrin Beatty, good to get your perspective today. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me, Peter.